the eve of Joe Biden's State of the Union address, a Washington Post ABC News poll found, probably to no one's surprise, that Biden's floundering approval ratings have hit a new low. Only 37% of respondents said they approved of the job Biden was doing, while 55% said they disapproved. The poll had even more bad news for Democrats, and it had to do with the economy. As the Post notes, the president appears to be weighted down by Americans' sour assessment of the economy. Today, 75% of Americans rate the economy negatively, up from 70% in November. That represents the worst rating since 2013 in post-ABC polls. By a wide margin, Americans say the economy has gotten worse since Biden took office. What's more is that 54% of respondents, or a clear majority, said they trusted Republicans over Democrats on the economy. Now, I want to break down this last point because people trusting Republicans over Democrats on the economy is something that has shown up in polling for quite some time. In fact, the myth that Republicans are better at handling the economy than Democrats has been so widespread that back in 2016, Salon published an entire article dedicated to debunking it. But just to look at some recent examples, back in November of last year, an NBC Marist poll found that voters favored Republicans over Democrats on the economy by 18 percentage points. Likewise, in 2020, nearly 80% of registered voters polled by Pew Research said the economy was the most important issue to them. And among those respondents, 49% said Republicans were better on the economy, compared to only 40% who said Democrats were better. So we know that Republicans are the party of big business and trickle-down economics, and we also know that over the last 4 decades, these types of policies have sent inequality through the roof, suppressed wages, and eroded stable, high-paying union jobs in favor of expanding a precarious and low-wage service sector. Now, given all of that, why do people continue to say they trust Republicans on the economy? Well, the short answer is that for decades, Democrats have also been a party of big business and trickle-down economics, just one that's slightly less ruthless, or depending on your perspective, less efficient than the Republicans. For instance, let's take the issue of trade. While the push for a North American free trade zone began in the 1980s with Ronald Reagan, it was formally cemented into law in 1993 by a bipartisan Congress and, of course, Democratic President Bill Clinton in the form of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. NAFTA, like other free trade agreements, struck down a number of tariffs, quotas, and other so-called barriers to trade between North American countries. And the problem is that this almost exclusively enriched corporations and economic elites at the expense of working people. Under free trade agreements, companies are given far more leeway to skirt environmental and public health protections and to outsource jobs to countries where they can pay workers for less than the US minimum wage. Here's how one member of the House of Representatives in 1991 criticized NAFTA.
Mr. Speaker, this coming Monday in Vermont, a coalition of groups representing organized labor and our working people, our farming community, and our environmental organizations will be coming together to determine the best way that we can stop the fast-track agreement with Mexico that the President is proposing, an agreement that will be a disaster for working people, for our farmers, and for the environment in general. Our nation, and this is an untold secret, is becoming a poorer and poorer nation. Our working people in the last 20 years have seen a significant decline in their standard of living because our nation has turned from a manufacturing economy into a service industry economy, which is paying our workers extremely low wages. One of the reasons that our standard of living is declining is that major American corporations like General Motors, General Electric, and many others have thrown hundreds of thousands of American workers out on the street as they run to Mexico and to Asia to hire desperate workers there and pay them starvation wages. We do not need a fast-track agreement. We need a new industrial policy which provides good-paying jobs for our workers. Thank you.
So the congressman, now senator, of course, was right. NAFTA put the U.S. on a fast track to a massive trade deficit with serious ramifications for American workers. In 2014, on the 20th anniversary of NAFTA, the Economic Policy Institute estimated that NAFTA had cost nearly 700,000 American jobs. As EPI founder Jeff Foe put it, NAFTA granted corporations extraordinary legal protections against national labor and environmental laws that they could claim threatened future profits. At the same time, workers and unions were denied the legal status needed to defend themselves in these new cross-border jurisdictions. As a result, the bargaining positions of U.S. workers, union and non-union, were severely undercut. As soon as NAFTA became law, corporate managers began using the threat to move elsewhere in order to force U.S. workers to work longer and harder for less. Threatening employees with outsourcing is now standard practice in American business. So it should really come as little surprise that by embracing NAFTA and subsequent free trade agreements, Bill Clinton and other Democrats laid the ground to lose a significant part of their base. In fact, a recent study by a team of researchers over at Princeton and Yale confirms this. The researchers looked at a number of historically Democratic counties that lost manufacturing jobs due to NAFTA in the 1990s and found that by the year 2000, a majority of voters in these former Democratic strongholds were casting ballots for Republicans. They write, voters in the places most impacted by NAFTA and voters who oppose free trade left the Democratic Party in large numbers beginning around the time of NAFTA's debate and implementation. Now, of course, none of this means that Republicans actually care about American workers or would have implemented less disastrous trade policies. After all, Reagan, George W. Bush, and most congressional Republicans from the 1980s through to today have also supported or pushed to expand free trade agreements. The problem is that when Democrats go along with right-wing pro-business policies like free trade and deregulation, voters rightly see it as a betrayal. Here's how journalist Chris Hedges explained it in an interview with Crystal Ball on Rising a few years ago.
There was a moment when the Democratic Party watched out for the interests of working men and women.
When did that go wrong?
Clinton, NAFTA. So, for instance, I was in Anderson, Indiana, and what was fascinating is that all these old UAW workers voted for Sanders. But in the presidential election, they voted for Trump. They were never going to vote for Clinton because 25,000 good union jobs, benefits, pensions, people could make $25, $30, $40 an hour, buy their own homes, send their kids to college. All of that was destroyed. Anderson, like most deindustrialized centers, is a wasteland with all of the attendant problems that come with that, with alcoholism and opioid addiction and domestic abuse, etc. Well, where did the jobs go? They went to Monterrey, Mexico, where GM is paying workers $3 an hour without benefits.
So to sum up, it actually makes a weird kind of sense that so much of the American public continues to say that they trust Republicans more than Democrats on the economy. After all, you know what you're getting with Republicans' economic policies. They make no secret whatsoever that they want to grow the economy pretty much exclusively by slashing taxes and deregulating business so corporations can rake in more profit. Democrats, on the other hand, so frequently come off as inconsistent or muddled or downright duplicitous in their economic policies because they're constantly trying to toggle between satisfying capitalists, growing the professional stratum of their base, and appealing to unions and workers. It's no wonder then that they struggle to get a majority of voters to trust them to skillfully steer the economy. And finally, lest you think that voters who don't trust Democrats on the economy are simply brainwashed by neoliberal ideology or right-wing media, consider this. When the most recent post-ABC poll asked people who they thought was responsible for inflation, 68% of respondents, aka a supermajority, blamed corporations trying to increase profits. What's more is that last year, according to Reuters, 7 out of 10 Democrats and even 40% of Republicans agreed that trickle-down economic policies had failed. Those don't really sound like the opinions of neoliberal ideologues. So what I'm getting at is this. In our current political climate, addressing the economy should be a slam dunk for any political party that sincerely prioritizes jobs, wages, and workers, fights corporate power and the billionaire class, and will undertake serious efforts to reverse disastrous trade policies. But the problem, as always, is that the Democratic Party just doesn't have a coherent answer because the Democrats, like Republicans, are captured by the rich. If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.